webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar on ISO 27001. I'm Alan Calder, I'm your host for today. I'm the founder of IT Governance, which is now established not only in the UK, but in the EU and in the USA. We are a single source supplier of everything that organizations need to tackle the broad subject of governing and controlling cyber risk and privacy, at the heart of which is ISO 27001. I've written a bunch of books around the subjects and related subjects. The 8th edition of the ISO 27001 is due out later on this year, of course, being brought up to date for ISO 27002. You will notice that you're all on mute. That's done deliberately so that we can work through the outgoing part of this webinar without too much background noise. I'm expecting that me talking will take about 40 or 45 minutes or so. At the end of that time, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. You may find as we go through the webinar that you have questions you want to ask. Please do not hold back. In your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a section called questions. If you open that, you can type questions into it as and when the question occurs to you. When we come to the Q&A session, what I'll do is I'll pick up questions that have already been lodged, more that you put in. I'll share the question with you, and then logically, assuming I can, I'll give you the answer to the question. So that's the kind of plan. We're aiming to finish by 5 o'clock British summertime. It's still technically summertime in Britain, even though the weather is kind of all over the place. So in all, about an hour for this webinar. IT Governance as a business has been at it for about 20 years. We've helped something like 12,000 clients across 5 continents. We have a number of subsidiaries, but all of the subsidiaries basically do in a specialized way what you can access through IT Governance, and you can access pretty much the same suite of ISO 27001 products and services, whether you're in the US, the UK, or the EU. And if you're in the US and you want to deliver in the EU, we put all that kind of together behind the scenes so that you get a nice, seamless, clear, straightforward delivery. IT Governance has said we are ISO 27001 implementation experts, and because ISO 27001 is an international standard, your choice in life is either to help organizations implement and maintain compliance or to audit compliance. You can't do both, because if you're doing both, by definition, you're marking your own homework, and that pretty much invalidates the point of having a certificate. Partner with Perry Johnson registrars, one of the biggest certification bodies in the world. And while we do implementation projects, Perry Johnson independently will certify management system compliance where clients needed to. We can put together pricing packages that enable you to your contract separately, because they are separate relationships. But we're able to put together packages which enable you to be sure from the outset of a project what your total cost will look like, to know that your certification body is in a position to handle certification at the end of your projects. And Perry Johnson, now being originally a US certification body, also have a European and UK entity, as well as entities around the world. So they can handle certification pretty well anywhere that we can handle implementation. So this is a webinar as a result of this partnership, which we've been running for a while, between Perry Johnson and IT Governance. But as I said, it's designed to be a partnership in which we can help you get the right solutions, but the delivery from IT Governance and Perry Johnson are independent, as they properly should be. We are experts in ISO 27001. We've helped something like 1,300 organizations prepare and maintain compliance to ISO 27001. We've got some 1,100 organizations used some or all of our governance, risk management, and compliance software. We've issued now more than 7,000 Cyber Essentials certifications. That's the UK government-sponsored scheme for minimum technical cybersecurity. We've delivered some 1,600 cybersecurity projects. We do pen testing, we do training. We do a completely integrated suite of products and services for organizations tackling ISO 27001, as well as the broader cybersecurity range of challenges and issues. Today, we're going to be talking briefly about the benefits of ISO 27001 and how you can leverage it for competitive, because doing 27001 ought to have competitive advantage. There are still only some 60,000 companies across the world certified to it, against, say, 1 million plus certified to ISO 9001. We're going to talk a bit about preparing for certification, the role of internal audits and management reviews, how to select a certification body, some tips around making sure your transition to ISO 27001 is successful, how to continually improve the ISMS and adapt to changing threats and risks. So what do you do once you become certified? ISO 27001 certification is a journey, not a destination. You will probably hear that said many times. It's the start of a journey which continues year after year after year. We as an organization, I think we're in our 12th or 15th year of being ISO 27001 certified. It's got a 3-year cycle of recertification. And we'll talk about how the Cyber Comply platform can help, particularly in that longer term strategy around making sure ISO 27001 helps the organization achieve and maintain a continually improving information security management system. As I said, if you do have questions, please put them into the chat function in the GoToWebinar box that you've got on your screen, and we'll pick those up and answer them when we come to the end of my prepared sections. So the benefits of ISO 27001. Why do ISO 27001? Many of you on this webinar will already have started out or will have achieved ISO 27001. So for you, this might be a bit of a rehearsal. There are people who are thinking about, is this worth doing? So the primary driver for me around doing ISO 27001 is that it's an international best practice standard. And that means that because you can get an independent opinion about whether you're doing it or not in the form of an independent certification, it means you can go to all of your customers and say, we're genuinely doing this properly. We have implemented best practice. We are doing it. We're not just saying it. Here is a certificate from a properly established and constituted certification body who've audited us and who will tell you that we are doing it properly. So that can help you win business. It can also help you with things like RFPs. In a growing number of RFPs, instead of providing a whole lot of detail about your security practices, you can simply go, here's my certificate number, this is where I got it, and that will deal with most of the security questions you'll get in requests for proposal or requests for quotation. So that can help, in other words, cost effectively win new business, help retain existing customers, because you can demonstrate, if you, let's say, have a court case brought against you for a GDPR breach, you should be able to demonstrate that ISO 27001 is proof of the fact that you had put in place appropriate cybersecurity precautions, and that would enable you to reduce or avoid financial penalties and losses arising from a breach. Because believe me, even if you have ISO 27001, you're still going to suffer cyber security breaches. Breaches happen. They happen irrespective of organization size, sector, how many precautions you take. Breaches will happen. And the whole point about ISO 27001, if you like, is not to build a barrier against breaches, but to ensure that as an organization, you're resilient against breaches. You're able to detect them early on. You can handle them, recover from them, keep your business operating. The fact that you can do that protects and enhances your reputation as an organization. The other thing that it does, and we'll touch on this a bit later on, is that it is a very straightforward way in which apart from managing cyber risk, you can very specifically demonstrate that you're complying with business, legal, contractual, and regulatory requirements. So all of that in ISO 27001 certification, it's a major competitive advantage for organizations. You might be the first company in your sector, in your field, in your speciality, in your geographic region, or one of the first companies to demonstrate this level of established cybersecurity. That can help you win customers in an environment where more and more companies are having to admit every day that they suffered a breach. We see companies go out of business because they've suffered a breach they can't recover from. We see companies lose their clients because they've suffered a breach. All of these kinds of areas, things that an ISO 27001 certification enables you to deal with. For those of you who haven't done or are just starting on the ISO 27001 journey, there are 10 clauses to the standard. You're going to worry about are clauses 4 through 10. So clauses 1, 2, and 3 are just talking about the standard itself, terms and definitions that you use. But clauses 4 through 10 set what you have to do. And none of those are cybersecurity controls, because cybersecurity controls are listed in Annex A to the standard. Annex A lists a number of controls. It doesn't give you details about them. It tells you what the control is about, and you choose which controls you're going to apply on the basis of legal, regulatory, or contractual compliance requirements, or alternatively on the basis of a risk assessment where you identify that there is a specific risk which putting in place a control might mitigate. So the clauses of the standard 410, clause 4 deals with the legal, contractual, statutory, and regulatory requirements. It sets out what those are, what the scope of the management system is, what you include within its range of activities, and what you exclude. Clause 5 deals with top management support, information security policy. Clause 6 deals with the actions you're going to take to deal with risks. So for the controls that you're going to put in place as a result of a risk assessment, how you do the risk assessment is addressed in clause 6. Clause 7 deals with people primarily, and the core of that is you need to have working within your management system people who have the skills and competences necessary, and it's up to you to determine what those are, to deliver against your management security objectives. Clause 8 is about the translation of your risk treatment plan into real life. So your risk treatment plan is a product of your risk assessment and of the controls you determine that you need in order to meet your various requirements. That goes into a risk treatment plan. And clause 8 sets out basically how you will deploy those controls. Clause 9 is about monitoring, measuring, analyzing, and evaluating the effectiveness of the ISMS. Your ISMS is about improving security over time, so it's not a stationary, unmoving management system. You should be able to see steady improvement in information security over time. And that's an important point to consider if you're doing ISO 27001 for the first time. Your first ever certification, nobody's expecting perfection. What they're simply expecting to see is the management system working, and you clear about how you're going to use it to progressively improve information security over an extended period of time. Correct. Clause 10 deals with one of the elements of that, which is corrective action and considered improvements. I'll touch on some of these areas as we go through the webinar. So that's a quick overview for those of you looking at fresh what ISO 27001 is about. I've talked previously about a number of the clauses and the makeup of ISO 27001, and for those of you who are just looking at it, 2022 version and 2013 version are very similar. The 2022 version has got a couple of minor changes in some of the controls, so it's not a very different standard to the 2013 version. Where the differences really do exist is in the list of controls in Annex A. But anyway, preparing for certification, what's the role of internal audits and management review? Well, you are expected, if you're going to put ISO 27001 in place, what the what you're doing there is, first of all, you need to make sure you're complying with the mandatory requirements in ISO 27001. So there are things which ISO 27001 uses the word shall to set out. So it says the organization shall do a risk assessment. That means you have to do a risk assessment. It's a mandatory requirement. It says you should do some other things. That doesn't mean you have to. It's a good idea, but it's not mandatory. It says you shall have an information security policy. That means you have to have an information security policy. So number one, you have to comply with the mandatory requirements in ISO 27001. Second thing you have to do is you have to comply with applicable legal, regulatory, and contractual security-related obligations. So all organizations operate in a compliance environment. What 27001 is looking for is those legal and regulatory requirements which relate to information, privacy, cybersecurity, and those customer contracts which set out specific requirements. And so if, for instance, you process payment cards because you're a merchant, there will be a contractual requirement that you comply with PCI DSS. That's not a legal requirement, it's a contractual requirement. You may have a customer who says, we want you specifically to comply with 7001 or with Cyber Essentials. You identify those as part of the second step, and you identify them in your documentation in relation to clause 4 of the ISMS. The third thing you have to do is demonstrate that you're complying with the policies and procedures you have created inside the information security management system. So that's what an external auditor is looking for when they come to do the audit. And when they're looking at compliance, they're looking for consistent and full compliance. But they're not looking for, well, we said we comply with this, but we don't quite really comply. We're going to do it next week. We didn't tell anybody. They're looking for what you've said you're doing, you're actually doing. And they're looking for the controls that you've selected being applied wherever they're in scope and they're working effectively. Working effectively might mean they've only been working for a day or 2 days or 3 days, but they are working. In other words, your risk treatment plan is implemented exactly as written. And your risk treatment plan might say this control requires a specific piece of hardware or software. It will be purchased by this date. It will be deployed by that date. And at the point of an audit, it might not yet have happened because those dates are still in the future. The auditor will want to see that the steps that you've identified in your risk treatment plan are taking place. The risk treatment plan is part of your information security management system. They also want to see that, and this will apply more and more beyond your first certification, that there is a continual improvement in the information security management system in delivering on your information security objectives. So you've got to clearly identify what your information security objectives are in order to identify how you're going to improve on them. But that's what your external auditor is looking for. So the role of internal audit is for you to make sure internally, before you have the expense of an external audit, that those things are happening. Is your organization, has it identified the contractual, legal, regulatory requirements? Does it have controls? Is it implementing them? Is your documentation that you've written being complied with? Are people doing what they say they should be doing? So it's an internal and objective assessment of your organization's compliance with those three elements. And an internal audit can be delivered by your own team. They need appropriate training, as long as nobody's auditing themselves. You can have the marketing team, could be financing, could be auditing the HR department. Those things are possible, but HR should not be auditing HR. Internal audit should be independent. The second thing you've got to be doing, internal audit is a mandatory requirement of 27001. Management review is another mandatory requirement. Management review is exactly that. It's management reviewing a number of items which are specified as inputs. It's things like results of internal audits. It's details of breaches and saying, is the management system working as it should? Are there changes we need to make to the management system or not? An external auditor won't come and do a certification audit, or usually won't come and do a certification audit unless you can confirm that internal audits are taking place, you've done a management review. They want to see the management system working, which means they want to see internal audits and management review. And The fact that you plan to do a management review once a year doesn't mean that you can't do one immediately in the week ahead of the commencement of the certification review, even though that's out of normal timetable. What certification auditors want to see is the management system working? Are the things which are mandated in the standard actually happening? External audits will then come along. They're independent. Yes, you contract with them. It's a commercial contract, but their job is to look at whether or not, deploying their independent knowledge and expertise, you are complying with those three elements that I mentioned. They may identify vulnerabilities that you don't. They might identify non-conformities that you haven't identified. All of that is value adding. It should go into your continual improvement log. It should be part of how you improve your information security management system. You should treat the external audit not as something to get by and hide things from, but to be open about. It can be a very valuable component of building over time a strong information security management system. So internal audits and management reviews are part of the process leading up to a successful external audit. Of course, an external audit can only take place once you've contracted with a certification auditor. And they will not come and do an audit until you've clearly got in place an ISMS that addresses the requirements of ISO 27001. So they will want to see your documentation. They will want to know that you've done all of the things that you should do, because they don't want to turn up and discover that you haven't done some of the things that you should do, and therefore they have to either fail you or they have to go away and come back later. They want you to be fully and properly prepared for the certification audit when they turn up. They will then come, because if you prepare properly, you would expect to pass. They will then come back on a regular basis. It might be every 6 months or once a year, depending on the scale and complexity of the organization, and do a regular surveillance audit, which will look at different aspects of your management system each time. And over the course of a 3-year period, you do a detailed review of all of the aspects of your management system. At the end of 3 years, which is when your certificate expires, they will do a re-audit. They'll repeat the audit across the management system. The only thing they won't repeat is the document review, because they know that's already there. They don't need to repeat that. So they go straight to what we might call a stage 2 audit, the in-place actual audit. Might seem an intimidating process, but it isn't really. If you prepare right, if you do the work around implementation, you do internal audits, you learn from them, you correct the mistakes, management review is a constructive and solid piece of the activity, then what you have is a working information security management system, and you should have a successful outcome. Organizations like us, as implementers, we provide a guarantee to our clients that the work we do to help you prepare will ensure that you get past the audit. We've got no control over the audit. And if you fail, then at our own cost, put that right. So good external support, good use of tools, all of those things can massively improve your likelihood of a successful outcome. So how do you select a certification body? Clearly a key choice, and it's a key choice because if you're building an information security management system, it's going to develop and improve over time. Starting point is commitment from management clear about the purpose, benefits and costs of an information security management system. Auditors, external auditors, will want to interview senior management to be certain that they haven't just signed a policy and don't know what they're doing. Preferably like to see senior management leading by example. They'll want to see that the information security management system has been designed to fulfill customer requirements, meet stakeholder objectives, actually does deliver continual improvement, meets information security objectives while complying with regulation, legislation, and industry and customer mandates, and is managing information assets. So you'll want to have tackled all of those things. Those are the kind of key objectives for your management system. We've talked about the necessity for internal audits and management review, and all of that in place. Yes, we've got that. The certification audits can come along, and the stage 1 audit will be an assessment of the documentation. That's quite often done off-site. You send them copies of your management system documents. You might still be in the process of implementing it. That's fine. They just want to see that you've created documents that meet the requirements of ISO 27001. In other words, they don't want to turn up, and that's when they discover that you don't have a risk assessment methodology in your ISMS, because that's a certain fail. Documentation's all there. You say, yes, we're ready, we're doing all the things we should do, you've got an agreed date, they'll come on site and they will do stage 2 assessment. And then, as I said, they will do a continuing assessment visit, a CAV, or a surveillance visit, and then at the end of 3 years, they will do a recertification visit. So I talk about accredited certification bodies. What on earth, for those of you for whom this is new, is an accredited certification body? And the answer is that all countries who want to have organizations that are companies that are able, public, private sector companies that can certify to an international standard, because the purpose behind international standard is to remove barriers to trade, will sign a memorandum or a contract of some sort with a national accreditation body. Every country will simply have one national accreditation body. In the UK, it's UCAS. In America, it's the North America accreditation body. In France, it's COFRAC. And the accreditation bodies are all members of the International Accreditation Forum. The IAF is the forum in which national accreditation bodies agree on the rules which are applied by all of them. What does the transition timetable look like? It's the same transition timetable for all countries. What are the recognition rules? It's the same for all countries, because logically, if you certified to ISO 27001 in France, that certification will be recognized in the UK, in Korea, in Japan, wherever you go. It's an international certification. So the accreditation body, one per country, will accredit a number of certification bodies. Certification bodies are the organizations which come and do the actual certification audit. And certification bodies will be accredited to more than one standards. They could do ISO 27001, 9001, 14001, and so on. And certification bodies can also, and they do sometimes, get themselves accredited in more than one country. There's nothing to stop BSI, for instance, supplying services in America or in Korea. There's nothing to stop DNV providing services. DNV is based in the Nordics, in providing services across the whole of Europe or the whole of the world, because it's a free trading marketplace. So you're accredited in a single country. Your accreditation enables you to trade and provide a standard service anywhere you like, but it will be you providing the accreditation. Certification bodies provide you with a certificate. There are so-called certification bodies who claim that they don't need to be accredited. There'll be certification bodies who have what they claim is an accreditation body, which doesn't belong to the IAF. All of those are really, at one level or another, a scam. They're not doing something which is recognized. Governments won't recognize them, companies won't recognize them, and so you should simply, as a matter of course, avoid them. And one of the clues is when the certification body says, we have an internal element that will do the work, another one will come and certify you. So it's all very nice and safe. Key rule of the IAF is that certification bodies cannot deliver consultancy. Consultants cannot do certification, because that is marking your own homework. You don't get the assurance of an independent certification that way. So that's how certification works, and it's up to you to choose your certification body. It's a commercial marketplace. There are a number of certification bodies, so you're going to choose on whatever your criteria are. It might be cultural fit, pricing. It might be prove to me that you've got competent auditors, although CBs have to have competent auditors in order to meet their accreditation requirements. Do they have experience in my sector? There are a number of criteria that you could use in selecting your certification body. So choose your criteria, talk to one or more certification bodies, and make a choice, contract with them, and you're in place, ready to get on with your program. So what do you do if you already have ISO 27001 and you're looking at transition from the 2013 version of the standard to the 2022 version of the standard? Well, it's been a long time. It's 9 years since 2013 version. And a lot has changed in that time, but nothing much has changed in terms of the management standard itself. There are a number of relatively minor changes in clauses 4 through 10. The biggest change is in Annex A. So Annex A is a list of controls. It lists all of the controls which are set out in ISO 27002, and logically, the 2013 version of the standard lists the 114 controls that are in ISO 27002 2013, and the new version of the standard, ISO 27001 2022, lists the 97 odd controls that are in Annex A of ISO. Oh, sorry, it's in Annex A of the 97 odd controls that are in ISO 27002 2022. And ISO 27002 2022 is a very interesting standard. It applies a number of new ways of organizing controls. It's brought in some new controls. It's consolidated others. But we've talked about those in previous webinars, so you can download those both from the Perry Johnson website and from ours if you want to go back and have a look at them. So I'm not going to talk more about them now, but I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the kind of steps that you're going to want to think about making the transition. First is you've got to do a gap analysis. So here's my current management system. There are a couple of changes to make in clauses 4 through 10, the changes you're planning to make in Annex A. So you need a gap analysis. This is the to be, this is as is, here are the changes, this is the timetable, this is who's going to deliver them. And you need to do that because one of the changes in clause 6 is a requirement that where changes are being made to the management system, you plan them. So by doing a gap analysis, you're complying with clause 6 in the revised version of ISO 27001. The second thing you need to do is make sure that all your staff training is updated to cover not just the bits of change to clauses 4 through 10, which are reflected therefore in your own ISMS, but the changes in the controls. And you need to make sure that you roll that training out to where staff are affected before your transition audit. Third area to be thinking about is the internal audit and management review process. So before you do the transition audit, it's worth making sure you've specifically done internal audits against the changes to your management system, and particularly the changes to your controls. You want to make sure they're working. And I would have an interim management review shortly before your transition audit starts, so that you as a management can review how things work. We as a business, for instance, we effectively do a management review every week. We have a weekly compliance and security forum meeting. We review everything that's going on, what changes are happening, changes to documentation, new things we've discovered. So in an hour, once a week, we do that. So for us, management review is kind of like a standard part of life, but you want to have specifically reviewed the effectiveness of the new controls you put in place prior to your transition audit. Another key area to be looking at is your risk assessment. So your risk assessment you probably did, and you might not have updated since you first implemented ISO 27001, because ISO 27001 says you update you review your risk assessment when there are significant changes in the environment, or once a year. And you might have only done it once a year because you haven't had significant changes. This must have cyber essentials. All of your customers will probably require GDPR compliance. All of that should go into your clause 4 compliance, and from that you should identify specific controls, which now might come from the new Annex A. Update your risk assessment. There have been, I promise you, new risks emerge in the last few years. You want to make sure you're dealing with them in your risk assessment. If you are, that will almost certainly lead to changes in the controls you select, and therefore changes in your statement of applicability and changes in your risk treatment plan. So update those, review your risk assessment, update it, update your statement of applicability, update your risk treatment plan, make sure it ties into the internal audit management review I just talked about, and make sure that you are managing the risks you've identified. Finally, make sure that you've got effective monitoring processes in place. Particularly, you want to be looking at incident response, because the speed with which cyber incidents are proliferating and the effect that artificial intelligence and machine learning will have on that proliferation is significant. You will see increasingly realistic phishing emails. You'll see voice scams which look and sound exactly like your chief executive but aren't, and you need to have people trained on how to spot them, and you need to have people really ready to report them, and a good working incident response and continuity process. So make sure that's working, make sure you're checking it, you know how it's working, and use the transition to reinforce the value and purpose of ISO 27001 certifications. That kind of goes back to the business value in doing ISO 27001 in the first place. Make sure it's clear to everybody. Make sure you push it back to your marketing and your sales conversation. We are ISO 27001 certified. We look after our customer data. We look after ourselves. I talked briefly about the risk assessment. Points I just want to make around risk assessment, which is that it's a critical component. It needs to be up to date. In looking at your methodology, if you used ISO 27001, that's also been updated. So there is an ISO if you use 27005, there is a new version of 27005. You need to update the guidance so that you're talking about the current version of the standard. Never go into certification using out-of-date versions of standards anywhere in your management system. So make sure it aligns with ISO 27005. Again, 2022 again hasn't changed very much, but there are a couple of minor changes in it. Make sure you're really clear about how you have identified the controls that you need in order to meet contractual, regulatory, statutory requirements, and the controls which you're putting in place in order to deal with a risk, to mitigate a risk. You don't need, if you've got a contractual, regulatory, statutory reason for selecting a control, you don't need a risk assessment reason for selecting the control as well. Your risk assessment is looking at things which you don't have to do. It's looking at things which you think you should do because your risk appetite says to you, we don't want to take that risk. You look at control attributes. The ISO 27002 sets out what the control attributes are. That helps you think about how you're going to apply them and classify them, and make sure that you've got them all working really effectively. The other thing to think briefly about, particularly if you're transitioning ISO 27001, is this the time to add another standard to your scope? So, for instance, ISO 27701, which is the personnel information management system, or ISO 27017 or 27018, which deal with security in the cloud. Those are standards that you can get added to your scope in your management system, but you can't get certified against on a standalone basis. So you might decide, if you're going through the pain of updating your statement of applicability, to build into it ISO 27701, 17, or 18, because that brings you added competitive positioning, because you can point at how you use those standards and controls to position yourselves ahead of the competition. But this is the time to be thinking about it. So have a good look at your risk assessment. Make sure that it's delivering what you want it to be delivering in the context of your transition. So briefly then, before I move into the final sections of this, continue improving your ISMS. There is a requirement that you have a continued improvement life cycle. Most commonly, people use Plan, Do, Check, Act. You can use other improvement life cycles from anywhere, but make sure everybody understands the logic of Plan, Do, Check, Act. The requirement in Clause 6 to plan changes kind of leads neatly into that. Risk management, actually get into the habit of reviewing your risks on a regular basis. Don't just do it once a year. It's probably worth doing on a quarterly basis. It's probably worth, if you're not already signing up for risk advisories, when you get the annual risk advisory, maybe from one of the European authorities or from the National Cybersecurity Center, go and review your risk assessment. Document what you're doing. Keep the information that says we reviewed our risk assessment. We've made changes to controls. That's how you stay ahead of cyber criminals. Cybercrime evolves very quickly, and you need to work out how you can get ahead. And make sure you are keeping employees involved. The more employees think of the ISMS as something to which they contribute, the quicker they will uncover vulnerabilities that might otherwise have been missed. And above all, learn from incidents. Cybersecurity incidents, it happens, they will happen. You want to say when it happened, okay, how do we avoid this happening again? What are the things we can do that will help us avoid a recurrence of this? So continually improving your ISMS, the 3 years after certification, leading up to recertification, these are the key areas on which you should be focusing. So, sum up, continually test and review risks, keep documentation up to date, management processes change. Somebody says, I've got a better way of doing this. Well, update the documentation. You always want documentation reflecting what people do. Don't say you can't change what you're doing because the document says you have to do X, Y, or Z. Keep the documentation up to date. Continually use ISO 27001 to protect and enhance your reputation. If you're not senior management, keep management informed. Tell them this is why we're doing it. This is another benefit we got as a company from it. This is another benefit you get because you can be sure that we're doing a good job for you. Stay on top of corrective actions. Very easy for corrective actions, particularly when you give them to somebody else to do to get out of hand. So it's a good thing to look at on a monthly, weekly basis. And of course, make sure staff awareness is a standard thing you do. And don't just do it once a year. Think about doing things like phishing training, perhaps on a quarterly basis. Phishing attacks change. Think about doing risk updates on a weekly or monthly basis so that in staff updates you're saying, and the latest thing we need to be looking out for is X, Y, or Z. Think about building data security champions inside the organization, all of whom will help build the culture of cyber security. How do you do that cost effectively? Cyber comply is one way of doing it. Many organizations think, gosh, I think I can find a way of doing this just using spreadsheets and documentation. Yeah, maybe, but the reality is that gets harder and harder and will get harder because of the proliferation of regulations. So this year alone, the UK GDPR will be revised. There are changes to EU GDPR in terms of what you are and are not allowed to do in terms of data export. There, for financial companies, is the Digital Operational Resilience Act in the EU, which affects companies supplying services into the EU. There are SEC regulations dealing with cybersecurity, and there are a number of others which are emerging. I saw a piece of data which suggests that many kind of small and medium organizations now have to comply with at least 6 different cybersecurity frameworks, some of them regulatory, some of them just my customers require, Cyber Essentials, for instance. And you want to do this cost effectively. That gets harder and harder to do on paper, in a spreadsheet. It gets harder and harder to do when whoever's in charge of information security manager is promoted or leaves, and you've got to bring somebody else in who's got a different spreadsheet. Organizations increasingly look at a platform like Cyber Comply, which is a joined up platform that does everything. It does your risk assessment, it got documentation on it, looks after incident response, gives you GDPR compliance, and does so with a centralized feed of updates when the laws change. It gives you a standard way of doing things, so that if you change an information security manager, you don't have to change how you do information security assessments. You can bring somebody and say, right, there's Cyber Comply, there's the training, enables you to go ahead and work out how to do it. I don't want to spend time talking about Cyber Comply particularly. You can find out more through Vigilance Software, which is a GRC subsidiary. It has a major development roadmap for Cyber Comply, covering more and more and more. It deals with incident management. It might be worth your while taking out a free trial to or taking a look at. But Cyber Comply can make maintenance and development long run of ISO 27001 really cost effective in an environment where cybersecurity mandates and requirements are changing at the pace and in the detail that they are. Of course, through IT governance, there's a range of ISO 27001 solutions that you can access. You would expect that. We provide internationally recognized certificated ISO 27001 practitioner training. So lead implementers and lead auditors we train. There's a foundation course. If you have a lead implementer, lead auditor certificate, you can do a transition course, which is a one-day course that enables you to update your certificates to demonstrate that you are competent to implement or audit the 2022 version of the standard. We are a distributor for IECs. You can buy copies of the standard. We can help you implement the management system. We've got a guide and support service. We've got something where we can do all the work for you. We've got a set of books. We've got a set of software tools. We've got staff awareness training. So do go on to any one of our 3 websites, UK, Europe, or the US, and have a look at our ISO 27001 solutions. You'll find that there is a very comprehensive set there that can help you, however it is you want to address ISO 27001. That brings me to the end of what I had been preparing to say. So there's now an opportunity for me to answer questions. Thank you for listening. And if you do have questions, the place to put them is in the question panel on your GoToWebinar user panel. If you go into that, you type the question in there. What I'll do is I'll read the question out, I'll answer the question, and then I'll move on to the next one. So I'll pick up the first questions that are there. I'll deal with those, and please do, if you have other questions, do put them in to the panel while I'm going. Can I recommend the number of internal audits that you should carry out? Should they be carried out annually or once through the year? Well, the simple answer to that is that you should carry out the right number of internal audits to give you assurance that your management system is working as you would expect it to be. I would be surprised if you can get that assurance by an audit of everything at some point across the 3-year cycle. Our own preference internally is to audit the whole of our ISO 27001 management system every year. We know that threats change, we know that processes change, so we audit the whole of our management system every year. We audit particular aspects of it every month. We have an audit plan which covers the year. We know which clauses are being audited in which parts of the group when, and we review those in our regular monthly or weekly management review. So as I said, if you only do one audit across the course of 3 years, I would expect that to be a non-conformance. I can't for the life of me imagine how you can get assurance in a once only in the 3 years that the management system is working as it should do. Because remember, that's the point, is you're satisfying yourself. You're giving yourself assurance that the management system is working as you want it to be working. I hope that answers that question. Has Brexit affected the acceptance of UCAS accredited certification in European countries? To the best of my knowledge, no, and there's no reason why it should. UCAS accredited certification, that there are always organizations who prefer accredited certification from their own national accredited certification body, or one of their own national accredited certification bodies. But the whole point about the international certification scheme is it's supposed to remove barriers to trade. So ISO 27001 certified anywhere in the world is a certificate which is valid anywhere else in the world. That's the rules of the IAF. And if you have somebody saying, no, I'm not going to recognize your ISO 27001 certificate from Britain because we're in France, you're entitled to take them on and say, no, I'm sorry, that's not right, and to talk to their certification body about it because they're operating outside the confines of the international scheme. Do you need formal risk management training to get the best from your ISMS? If so, which training, ISO 27005 or ISO 31000? You don't need formal risk management training, is the simple answer to that question. Many people do it because they understand the ISO 27001 requirements. So clause 7 says you must deploy people who have the skills that you consider necessary to be effective inside the ISMS. Now, as an organization, you can say people who are self-taught, that's adequate. Or you might say self-taught is fine, but then you might have taught yourself things which are not useful, so we want you to get a certification or go on a training course. If you're going to do a training course, I would say do ISO 27005 because that focuses on information security risk assessment. ISO 31000 is an enterprise level risk management standard. It follows the same methodology as ISO 27005, but it deals with the broad range of risks. So it deals with financial risk, it deals with business continuity risk like extreme weather, drought, pandemics, it deals with people shortages, it deals with building outages. It's a very broad range, and that can mean that from an information security risk perspective, quite a lot of the course is wasted on you. Of course, if your organization already has an ISO 31000 risk management strategy, it's worth doing 27005 and patching it into ISO 31000. ISO 31000 will typically say information security risk is a risk. We've got 3 things we worry about. Your ISO 27005 will say, okay, those 3 things actually breaks down into 150 different things. So that gives you a properly granular approach to risk assessment. If you use the CyberComply software package, does this reduce the amount of documentation you have to create from scratch? And would it order to accept the output for SOA and risk treatment plan from the software? Yes is the answer to both of those. The point is that while the documents exist as templates, you're going to have to populate them with your own role descriptions, your own decisions about which controls you're going to implement, but the format for a statement of applicability and a risk treatment plan is standard. The risk assessment software on CyberComply will automatically output your choices about controls to the statement of applicability and automatically populate the risk treatment plan. So you've got to make the decisions. Your decisions still have to be valid in the context of your information security management system, but the whole process of then managing what you're doing is automated and made simple for you by the software. For organizations being certified for the first time, what are common areas that auditors pass but label as an area of improvement? For example, competency evidence. So what auditors typically will do is they will identify major non-conformances, minor non-conformances, and opportunities for improvement. Major non-conformances are things which basically mean that the audit will be suspended while you fix it. So a major non-conformance is something like you haven't done a risk assessment. You haven't identified what competence looks like in the people working inside the management system. Those are major non-conformances because you can't imagine how the management system would work without having met those mandatory requirements. A minor non-conformance might be that in identifying competences required, you haven't specified whether those competences can be achieved through attending an outside course as well as through personal experience, or likely you've said you have to have a certificate and the auditor says, so show me the people who can do the work, and you've got 3 people who can do the work, but somebody's certificate has expired because they're certificated ISO 27001 2013, not 2022. That would be a minor non-conformance. It's minor because it doesn't really affect the management system, but it's a minor non-conformance. An opportunity for improvement is not going to be something covered by either a shall or a should in the management system documentation. It will be this might be worth thinking about in future. OFFIs, as we call them, are not things that an auditor will be passing over, but which they might have picked up. An opportunity for improvement genuinely is forward-looking. It's worth doing, but it's not something which is either genuinely a minor or a major non-conformance. I hope that is clear. Do we get the sheets later on? Yes, we'll only email the slides. Would it be fine if the risk assessment methodology we have used is FMEA based rather than usual context based? Yeah, the context-based risk assessment, you can use whatever risk assessment methodology you think is appropriate to your business. You do not have to use ISO 27005 or anything else. What you do need to do is be clear about why you have selected the risk assessment methodology that you have, demonstrate why it is appropriate for the business environment in which you're operating. So you might have a regulatory requirement to use a specific risk assessment methodology, for instance. Your sector might use a specific risk assessment methodology, but you want to be clear about why you've selected that risk assessment methodology. You then want to document it inside your management systems. This is how we do it, and you then want to do exactly what you've documented. And there's no possible basis then on which an auditor could find a non-conformance in that sense. Quick question: the new ISO 27001 standard doesn't refer to Annex A controls as preferred with A as in 5.1. That could lead to confusion as if we refer to 5.1 is leadership or commitment or policies for information security. So the controls are organized differently in Annex A. They're organized into 4 separate groups. The clauses in the management standard are listed clauses 4 through 10. And if you're using those clauses in order to identify your documentation, I would suggest that you, in your management system, use the clauses without a prefix. I just say, you know, clause 4 of my management system. I set out the requirements, or set out how I identify the requirements of interested parties. And then I would choose controls, and I might simply prefix those with a control or the group of controls. So the controls are grouped around people, process, and technology, for instance. I would choose one of those and preface that with a control reference, so that it's clear to you, and if necessary put a bit of an index or description. All you want is something which is really clear to you and the users inside your business as to how you've differentiated between what you are doing. What is the big difference between 2013 and 2022? They're not just, by the way, they're not revisions. So ISO 27001 2013 is a standard. It was published in 2013. ISO 27001 2022 is a standard published in 2022. It replaces the 2013 version. You've got a just under 3-year period to transition from one management system to the other. The differences in 2022 is that there's a completely new Annex A. It's a completely different set of controls, and there are about half a dozen relatively minor changes to clauses 4 through 6. If you go to one of the earlier webinars in the series, you can download from the Perry Johnson website or the IT governance website, you will be able to see I covered those in a little bit more detail. If starting from scratch in 27001, we have ISO 9001, how long typically does it take to get certification audit ready? Well, that kind of depends very much on how big your organization is and how much you've already got in place in the way of information security controls. And all organizations will have some information security controls in place. Typically, if you are going to build, as we would recommend you do, an integrated management system, you would want to use the common clauses in ISO 9001, which will be clauses 9 and 10, for instance, which deal with internal audits and management review. You will want to deal with clause 5, clause 4. Those are pretty common clauses. You just want to extend them to deal with information security. Your biggest change will be around risk assessment and controls and competences. And for a small organization, it might take you about 3 months to get ready, depending, as I said, on how much you already have in place. A large organization could be 2 years. You know, if you're a global organization, it could take a couple of years to get ready. So the sensible thing to do is to get an expert, us, to come and do a gap analysis. We can relatively quickly say, okay, this is what you're currently doing to get to where you want to do. This is what you've got to do for the scope that you want to achieve it in. This is roughly how long it will take. That's probably one way of working out how long it will take. But it is very dependent on current information security practices, the size of the gap between what you're currently doing and what you want to be doing. Yes, I think we've dealt with the question about emailing copies of slides and recordings of the webinars. Can we recommend what an achievable scope looks like for an organization building its ISMS for the first time? For most organizations, we would say an achievable scope should be the whole of the organization. To try and narrow it down gives you a set of genuine problems, because it's a requirement that auditors, when carrying out the audit, examine the interfaces between the scope of your management system and outside parties to make sure that the outside parties are genuinely outside parties and that there are appropriate mechanisms to regulate how information security is managed across the scope boundary. So organizations who try and narrow the scope to say, let's just say the IT team, suddenly find that the people the IT team is supporting, like the business users, are outside scope. So ISO 27001 certificate A is not applied to them. So the certificate itself says it's only to the IT team. And then B, you've got to look at how do you regulate and control the actual users of the management system. All of that can be very painful and very difficult to do. So a manageable scope usually is the whole of the organization. If you're a multi-country organization, the smallest scope is probably whatever organization or combination of organizations has its own management team who are able to determine policy and apply controls. And this can get very complicated, so it's an area where it's worth talking to us in a bit more detail around how you might be going about scoping, but that's normally the kind of logical approach. Just a couple more minutes. Currently pursuing masters with cybersecurity, what would be a better opportunity for fresh students, kind of differentiate between accreditation and certification? So certification in ISO 27001 is something an individual can achieve or a company can achieve. They're different things. An individual certification is attending a training course, passing an exam. A company getting certification is implementing a management system and passing an external audit. Accreditation is the process by which a different body, a third party, assesses the competence of the certification body to do its certification. So for certification, you're looking at, sorry, the answer to your question is it's certification, whether for an individual or for an organization. Transition to compliance, you have, if I remember now, 3 years to complete the transition from ISO 2022. If you haven't transitioned by then, your certificate will automatically become invalid. But again, we covered that in some detail in the last webinar, so I'd like to encourage you to go and download that, have a quick run through it. You'll be able to get in some detail strategies around how you can tackle those issues. We're two teams, one working on ISO 9001 and 14001 and one on 27001. Can you please advise if ISMS can be implemented to the 9001 QMS or stand independently? It can be both. It can be independent, it can be integrated. We would always advise you to do it integrated, because otherwise you have to have two internal audit teams, you have to have two management reviews. It just gets complicated. You have silos. And you really want to have an internal audit which looks at ISO 9001 and ISO 27001 at the same time. It's way more cost effective to build an integrated management system where you have one way of doing things and that management system is certified to multiple standards. Again, talk to one of our account managers or consultants. We can talk to you about how practically you can do it. But our advice would always be for cost effectiveness, for business benefit, is to build an integrated management system. Also, will ISO 27001 2022 have any consideration to 27701? So yes, add 27701 to the scope of your ISO 27001 management system. You cannot get certification on its own to ISO 27701. ISO 27701 covers personnel information management. It's a very good way of demonstrating GDPR or other compliance. It can be done within the scope of, and so you have to extend the controls so that your 27001 Annex A statement of applicability includes all the 27701 controls. Until 27701 itself is updated, you have to do a bit of a read across to the original set of controls, map them to 27001 2022, and then implement them. Ladies and gentlemen, we really are now, I'm so sorry, out of time. Just to reiterate, the recording will be available to everybody. On our website, there are some further webinars coming up, not only around 27001, but we'll be covering items like the new European Privacy Seal, which enables you to demonstrate GDPR compliance. We'll be covering DORA, the EU Digital Operational Resilience Act. We'll be covering the new SEC regulations around cybersecurity. It's a whole series of webinars. Please do go onto our websites and sign up for those as the webinars become available, as they will over the course of the next few weeks. But I'd like to thank you all for joining the webinar. I hope it's been useful. If there's any way we can help you on your ISO 27001 journey, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd love to help you be successful. Thank you all and have a very successful day today. Bye-bye.